This presentation is over Chapter 5 of our textbook called Editing for Concision and ACS Style. This chapter starts with a simple quote by Robert Browning simply stating, "Less is more." This is important in the concept of editing as we see our material again. Editing focuses on more sentence-level issues like word choice, paraphrasing, and style. The goal for our writing is to be clear, concise, and correct. Sometimes simple is better and more effective. It is by guidelines that every academic discipline must use gender-neutral language in place of language that refers to gender roles and sexist assumptions. First of all, we need to avoid using masculine or feminine nouns. So instead of words like mankind and man-made, we should use words such as people, humans, or even manufactured instead of man-made. We also want to avoid using masculine or feminine pronouns, such as he, his, or her, and refer to both sexes. At the bottom is a good example of editing. Instead of saying man, we can revise that statement to state scientist. Here's some tips to edit for concision. First of all, we need to eliminate throat clearing. In this case, don't be unnecessarily wordy, and eliminate phrases such as due to the fact or in not the too distant future, and instead we should write words just like because or soon. We also need to eliminate unnecessary prepositions. Prepositions are little words that show relationships between other words like to, in, for, or of. This is similar to throat clearing. Next, we need to avoid weak verbs. Scientific writing can be confusing and sometimes boring. Instead of using sentences with colorless verbs like to be, is, or are, we can help a writer link together various fragments of knowledge, like B is a result of A, and C is a result of A, and A and C are similar in that both are. So a tip to help with this is to just crank out the ideas and then go back and refine how you express them through careful revision and editing. We also need to use the passive and active voice effectively. We can use either the active voice, which is when the subject performs the action, or the passive voice, when the subject receives the action. The passive voice obscures who or what is responsible for the central action of the sentence, while the active voice makes it clear as to who or what is doing the action. It is more direct and concise than the passive voice. But a great time to use the passive voice is in writing the experimental section of lab reports. However, you need to be able to choose and use the voice that best suits your purpose in a particular situation, and make sure to not mix active and passive voices in one sentence. Here are some guidelines to follow when editing for American Chemical Society style. First of all, we only Latinate abbreviations in tables, figure captions, and parentheses in text, and not for foreign words, even though it is a common practice. Second, we need to spell out the full genus and species name the first time it appears. After that, we can abbreviate it. Third, do not treat symbols for the elements as abbreviations. They don't need to be defined, and there are more conventions discussed later. Fourth, there are some abbreviations that are used commonly in chemistry writing and have acquired some kind of celebrity status. Here are the most common, such as atomic weight, molar, boiling point, etc. And as a general rule, we need to avoid using abbreviations except those with the celebrity status. Here are some capitalization rules for chemists. First of all, we don't capitalize the words periodic table or the name of chemical elements. We also don't capitalize the names of chemical compounds either. But we do capitalize things like eponyms, which are terms derived from the name of a person. We capitalize the name, but not the noun it modifies. Fourth, we should capitalize adjectives formed from proper names, like Mendelian. And also, we do not capitalize units of measure, like amperes or daltons. Sixth, Celsius and Fahrenheit are always capitalized because they are not themselves units. They are names of temperature scales. We also capitalize the words figure, table, chart, or anything referring to a specific numbered item. We also don't capitalize the common names of equipment or techniques. Just remember to be careful to distinguish between instruments and techniques. For an example, an atomic absorption spectrometer is an instrument, while atomic absorption spectrometry is the technique used to determine trace metals. There are also some scenarios where we do not use hyphens, such as in chemical names, when we're multiplying prefixes, or when we're adding an ly to the end of a verb or an adjective. Next, we need to be aware of spacing. There's almost always a space between a number and the unit. The only exception to this are percentages and angular degrees. Next, we need to make sure to insert a space before and after a mathematical symbol that has a number on both sides. And lastly, when units are combined to give compound units, we need to leave a space between the symbols for the individual units. Next, it is important that we pay attention to our spelling. We need to make sure to proofread for simple spelling errors. Simple spelling errors show the impression of carelessness or laziness, and it's your responsibility to make sure that your work is free of spelling errors. Second, there are many words that come from Latin origin that have a singular and plural kind of spelling. Many writers tend to use the plural when the singular form was needed. So here are a list of common forms that can be found in the textbook on page 91. Next, we need to go over some chemistry-specific conventions. So for chemical elements and formulas, we need to be sure that we're using a Roman type font with lowercase. And it is also not acceptable to use the symbol for an element in place of the word. In the top example, you would need to spell out the word arsenate instead of using the formula. The bottom example is the correct one as to where the word nitrogen is actually spelled out in word form. Next, you need to use superscript and subscripts when writing formulas. This can be done easily with a word processing software. We also need to make sure that you're using the appropriate special symbols, like Greek letters. Again, a word processing software can do this for you. And for quotation marks, this follows more of a logical placement that differs from the traditional style. According to the ACS Style Guide, if the punctuation, the comma, or the period is part of the quotation, then it should be placed inside the quotation marks. If it's not part of the quotation, it should be placed outside the quotation marks. Below is an example of how to use the ACS Style Guide quotation marks effectively. So when you write about chemistry, pay attention to the details of the conventions of the American Chemical Society style. No one expects you to remember all the details, but you should at least be aware. So here's a checklist you can use for editing listed in the back of Chapter 5 of our textbook. Thanks for watching.